My family and I have been living in a homeless shelter since the very first day that my city was officially on lockdown. The complex used to be an old motel, and in each room there's about 4 people. Thankfully, since mine is the only family here, we get to have a room to ourselves. That being said, we've been through a number of neighbors on either side of our room, and as you can expect, not all of them were good. You have your typical druggies and mentally unstable people, but surprisingly, the worst was a man that we had actually become friends with. Let's call him David. David had been one of our first set of neighbors on the left side. He was a bald man in his late 20s to early 30s of average height and build. He wore glasses, a bright red beard, and he had a friendly disposition. My parents had started talking to him whenever they went outside for a smoke. My mother could talk to anyone, and she would always make friends. But my dad, well, he's a bit more reserved and introverted, a lot like me. So the fact that he had also started talking to David made me immediately trust him. A horrible decision. My mother eventually insisted that I come meet him. He was exactly the kind of person that I usually get along with. He was mildly crude, sarcastic, and always down to talk about really deep and dark things. I befriended him rather quickly, and we discussed everything from stupid conspiracy theories to even childhood trauma. Both me and my 16-year-old brother were actually really quite fond of him, but this obviously didn't last. It started out small. He would talk about sex, his previous wife's affairs, and things of that nature. At first, I was really happy that he was talking to me like an adult. I had just turned 18 years old in February, and I was still a little shocked about how differently people were treating me. Things had started to escalate fairly soon after that. He started hitting on me and talking about a hypothetical relationship between us. I'm pretty used to this kind of behavior, as I've been creeped on long before anywhere near the age of consent. But it still felt wrong that a man that was a bare minimum of 10 years older than me was being so forward to my barely legal self. However, I'm extremely unsocial, and I recently lost the remainder of all my friends, so I was just really desperate for human contact outside of my family, so I would just politely decline him and just laugh it off. One day when my parents and I were all outside, David came outside as well. He made really friendly conversations with us, and eventually the topic drifted into the staff that work here. For some context, there's always staff and at least one security guard that's working at all times. They do room checks, symptom checks, deliver meals, do laundry, and so on. Most of them are pretty chill, but there are a few of them who really abuse their power and make the residents' lives miserable. Also, the owners are super shady and do a lot of things that aren't exactly okay. So when David had then said that the security guard was going around the back of the building and looking in bathroom windows to make sure no one was smoking or doing drugs in there, well, my parents believed him. They really just hate the way the place is run, and they're always mad about something, so they were pretty quick to board the how dare they train. I, on the other hand, just took the information with a grain of salt. I wasn't so eager to believe in rumors that really have no ground to stand on. For all I knew, it could have been started by a junkie that was tripping and just thinking what he was seeing was real. A few nights later, when I was using the bathroom, I had heard the crunching of footsteps right outside. Now, the complex is surrounded by orchards, so it's not really uncommon to hear walking among the trees, but something in the pit of my stomach told me something was off. I snapped my head up just in time to then see a pale figure jerk away from the bug screen right on the open window. I quickly finish up, all the while the window never leaving my line of sight. The moment my pants are up, I decide to bolt and then run to tell my parents. They're pretty much both beyond pissed. They pretty much immediately assumed that it was security. That is, until they open our door only moments after the occurrence, to then see that the only security that was working on that night was still up at the front gate. Not only that, but the man wasn't white. So whoever's face I saw, it wasn't him. This immediately confused them. On the next morning, My parents are asking everyone if they saw or heard anyone outside their bathroom windows last night. There was a resounding no from everyone, but what really struck me as odd the most was that no one had even heard of the rumor about security. It seems like everyone here is extremely paranoid, so the fact that such a serious accusation was apparently not even being discussed was more than a bit strange to me. My parents just assumed that David had just been messing with us, or that someone had been messing with him. I wanted to believe that too. After that, I was so freaked out that I started closing the window every time I went in there. Right around this time, the weather started getting really warm, which meant that clothes started getting more revealing so that we wouldn't fry in the late spring sun. I guess this was a little too much for David to handle, as he started being even more forward than he was before, even around my parents. This didn't sit well with them. It eventually got so bad that they requested he be moved to a different room. He wasn't. I started staying inside at all times when I could, and just avoiding David when I couldn't. He must have noticed this, as he became increasingly aggressive every time he approached me. He would always holler at me from across the complex and also watch me intently whenever I walked my dog. I had started noticing a very David-shaped silhouette right outside our window in the dead of night whenever my family was asleep, peeking into the tiny gaps in the thin curtains. I would really like to say that I told my parents, but I didn't. I was really afraid that they would make a big stink about it and that we'd get kicked out and then have nowhere to go in the middle of a pandemic, so I just kept quiet. David was eventually moved, but not before he scared me one last time. I was once again in the bathroom. I had just gotten out of the shower and I was brushing my teeth with my towel wrapped around my body. I had music playing and was dancing around, just generally having a good time. It was such a good time that I apparently forgot that I didn't close the window. I had left it open during my shower to reduce the amount of steam, and I meant to close it when I got out. Thankfully, the shower was on the same wall as the window, making it physically impossible to see into it. The sink that I was standing at, however, well, that was in full view of the window. This realization then hit me like a ton of bricks, when I then suddenly became hyper-aware of the feeling of being watched. I tried to act natural, really hoping it was just my paranoia. I finished brushing my teeth, then opened up the medicine cabinet to put away my toothbrush. As I was closing it, I made sure to stop at an angle where I could see the reflection of the window in the mirror. Lo and behold, there he was. David was stood there with his face pressed against the bug screen. I was frozen in fear. The worst part was when he realized he had been caught, he didn't even move away immediately. He didn't even have the decency to look shocked or ashamed. No, he looked so smug, so self-satisfied. And then he moved with his footsteps crunched off into the distance. I never saw him again after that, and I never told my parents about it or about him watching me while I slept. It still really freaks me out to think about it, especially since he has 2 daughters of his own. I only hope that they're never put into his custody. Even if he doesn't do anything to them, I really can't imagine what growing up with a father that acts like this would do to a girl. Somehow I really don't think that he'd set a very good standard for them. Hopefully you all agree with me. Just for some context, I'm about 5'6" and about 220 pounds, and I'm 15 years old. I'm also in high school and I don't really like talking to people as I have the worst anxiety. I would say I'm fairly good looking but nothing to gush about, and a little bit on the bigger side. The story happened in November of 2019. It was a normal day, and I actually had a really great day. I knew that if I enjoyed myself in school though, that something bad was probably going to be happening at home. I never enjoy myself in school. Everything was pretty good up until my walk home. When school was over, I got on the bus as normal. The ride seemed faster than normal that day. Something was telling me that I needed to call my mom to pick me up from the bus stop, but I couldn't. The previous day, I had gotten my phone taken away for personal reasons. Anyways, I got to my stop and got off. I walked in, I'm about halfway home when I suddenly feel that feeling when you just know someone is watching you. I can't really explain it, but I felt it. I'm now in my neighborhood and there's barely any cars anywhere riding past. The street that I live on is like a horseshoe. It's kind of like a hill. Most of the people on my street are older and barely ever leave their houses. As I was walking down the street, a young man walks out of a house. He looked about 17 years old, 6'3", and had a muscly build. His body didn't really match his age, but I didn't really pay any attention, thinking that maybe he played sports because our town is pretty big on sports and training. Usually I would pull out my phone and act like I didn't see or hear someone trying to talk to me, but today I couldn't do that. He smiled and waved at me, and I did the same because I didn't want to be rude. Suddenly he walked all the way down his driveway and then struck up a conversation with me. At first, it was just typical small talk as usual. Then he began to move closer, and before I knew it, he had his hand right on the small of my back, then guiding me right up the driveway. I asked him what he was doing, and he continued to walk me up the driveway. I tried to struggle, but he wrapped his arm around my waist so tightly and just continued. I started to yell at him to let me go, but then he put his hand right over my mouth and I was silenced. I honestly thought that I would never see my family again, never experience prom, homecoming, get a job, get married, all of the things you're supposed to do in life. I didn't want to be near him one more second, so I had to think. What could I do to at least stun him? I decided to bite his hand. He then let go and started to scream in pain. After he let go, I ran down the street and then pulled my key and stumbled to get my key into the door. When I turned to look back, I saw him running down the street absolutely enraged. He didn't yell or say anything, just ran. I eventually unlocked the door and stumbled into the house and then locked it. I ran to my room and then closed the door. Almost immediately, my mother yells up to me and asks me what's wrong. I say nothing and I just sit there, too in shock to cry or to do anything. Yesterday I went for a walk and I had finally decided that I was ready to go back outside, and right as I made my way up to the hill to the top of the street, a wave of dread then washed over me. I wanted to turn back, but I decided to take the horseshoe back around to my house. I made it past the house, and before I knew it, I was right on the other side of the horseshoe. The feeling was still there. Since we're in quarantine, I was really surprised to see a figure walking behind me. He had a really large dog with him, and he had then walked with long strides. He then caught up to me rather quickly. As soon as I saw his face, I stopped. I couldn't move. He then started to smile with such a creepy smile. Even now, I can't get it out of my head. Every time I close my eyes, he's there. He had started to wander down the street until he slowly walked up to me.
Hey, remember me?
I couldn't respond.
It was really rude the way you ran away from me the last time we spoke.
He moved a little closer until his lips were right on my ear.
I'm gonna make sure you don't run this time.
I snapped out of my trance when I once again felt his hand on my waist. This time, however, he wasn't even trying to be gentle. He was practically ripping my shirt. Just then at that moment, I had saw a car turn down my street and I started waving my hands like a crazy person. By the time they slowed down to see what was wrong, he was gone. He must have ran through the people's yards or something. Hey, are you good? Everything okay here? It was my neighbor's eldest son. I was so grateful for him being there. I then totally broke down. He ended up driving me down the street to my home, and despite having him right next to me while I told my parents, they didn't believe me. It's so frustrating that the ones that are supposed to be there for you think that you're lying about something so serious. Since they don't believe me, I decided to write it here. I haven't ran into the guy since, and I'm really glad. I hope sharing my story will help someone. Just be careful out there. A long time ago, when I was 14 years old, during summer vacation of 1998, Some new neighbors had moved into the house next to mine, and in moved in a kid we'll call Chris. This kid was a troublemaker, and in retrospect, he was someone that I definitely shouldn't have gotten mixed up with. He was 16 years old and 2 grades ahead of me. At first, I really kind of looked up to him in a big brother kind of way. The first couple of times we hung out, we had a lot of fun playing video games and just being kids. We went up to his room and he had all kinds of rock band posters all over the walls. Something that kind of struck me as odd was the 2 stuffed animals that he had on his dresser. One was a teddy bear that had safety pins and sewing needles all over its face. The other was a dog that was ripped open and what looked like a red marker drawn around the cut, making it look like blood. I was a little creeped out by this, but Chris had then distracted me by then asking,
"Hey, have you ever seen a Playboy?"
and then handed me a magazine. I was pretty excited by this, being a 14-year-old that had only seen porn a few times. Back then, the internet was something only a few houses had, so I wasn't able to access the treasure trove of porn online. I quickly forgot all about those stuffed animals and then had my attention on the magazines. A few days later, we hung out again. There was an open field in a really wooded area nearby, and we headed out there. Chris was carrying a duffel bag with him. I asked him what was in it, and all he told me was,
"Just some stuff. Don't worry about it."
When we got to the field, he then said to me in a really harsh voice,
"Don't tell my dad about this."
Then opened up the bag. He pulled out a small BB gun, a pocket knife, and what looked to be some throwing darts. He took out the BB gun, pointed it around, but didn't shoot anything. Then he pointed it right at me and said bang. He was laughing while doing this and calling me a little wimp, but I was seriously freaked out by that gesture. Then he pointed the gun at a nearby group of birds and then fired. I wasn't able to tell if he hit one or not, and they all flew away. He then said let's go and packed up the bag and then motioned for me to follow him. We headed a little bit into the nearby forest when we got to a really small pond. Chris set down the bag and then got out one of the darts. He walked around, just staring at the ground. I asked him what he was doing and he just told me to shut up in response. Then he threw the dart down on the ground. I heard him muttering to himself and start slamming down his foot on the ground. Then he said,
"Ha, got it."
I saw him reach down and then pull up a squashed frog. He then started to shove it right in front of my face as if it were some kind of sick trophy or something. I poked it with my finger and it slightly twitched. The poor thing was still alive. Chris noticed it as well and then set it on a nearby tree stump. He got out the knife and flicked it open.
"Here, I want you to cut it open,"
he said as he handed me the knife. This is the moment where I realized there was definitely something wrong with this kid. I really didn't want to do it, so I told him I didn't know how.
"Just do it,"
he says back to me. I took the knife and I then held it near the helpless little frog. Up to this point, I had never really killed anything besides small insects. I just stared at it for a few seconds, feeling sorry for it.
"Come on, what are you waiting for? Are you some kind of loser? Grow some balls and kill it,"
Chris said to me. My heart was beating in fear. I closed my eyes and lowered the knife. I felt the tip of the knife then hit the tree stump, and I opened my eyes. I had missed. Chris was getting angry at me, and he then started shouting at me,
"You little idiot,"
and he punched me in my side. He was a really big guy, and this really hurt. I knew he would punch me again if I didn't comply, so I very squeamishly stabbed the frog. It let out a starving little croak, then died. I can only hope it was quick for that poor animal.
"Took you long enough, you wuss,"
Chris said as he took the knife from my hand and then started cutting the frog all apart. He had really took pleasure in mutilating its dead body, pulling out its organs and even ripping its legs off. He then threw the remains into the pond and then said,
"We gotta get back. My dad doesn't know I took this stuff."
I was all too happy to leave. We eventually got back and stood in his driveway.
So if my dad ever finds out about this, I'm gonna kick your ass.
He walked to his backyard and then disappeared behind his house. I tried avoiding Chris after that day. We had played video games a few more times, but he was still kind of a jerk to me, and I really didn't want to hang out with him anymore. Once school started, he was a junior while I was a freshman in high school. I didn't really see him much, and he began to hang out with some kids that were just as rough as he was. I remember passing by his friends one morning before classes started, and he had then shouted,
"Hey, there's my loser neighbor,"
and he threw a pencil at me while his friends laughed about it. Then one night I saw a cop car show up to his house. I don't know exactly what it was about, but I didn't see Chris in school after that. Later on, my dad had told me that apparently Chris's dad told him that Chris had been caught with drugs. I saw him a few times during the next summer, but he just slightly waved saying hello, and sometimes he would ignore me entirely. The next school year, he was then transferred to a different school. He moved out quickly after graduating high school, and I never saw him again after that. Looking back on everything over 2 decades later, I realize now just what a messed up bad kid Chris really was. Anyone that enjoys killing helpless animals and mutilating their dead bodies clearly has some mental issues. To this day, whenever I see a frog or toad, I still think of that poor little frog I stabbed, and I can hear its death croak. I really have no idea where Chris is today. He doesn't have a Facebook profile or any social media, and he has a fairly common last name. Both my parents and those neighbors moved out of that neighborhood, and they never kept in touch with each other. I would really like to hope Chris got the help he needed, and that he was able to keep his violent tendencies under control. However, if he didn't, it really wouldn't surprise me if he's in jail or even dead right now. I just really hope that he never hurt anyone or any other animals. Unfortunately, however, deep down I really doubt that's the case. When I was 25 years old, there was a short time when I was staying at my aunt's. It was her and my 2 cousins and I. She lives in a nice apartment complex, and her unit is on the lower level. Her living room has a lot of windows that she keeps open for fresh air, as well as for her cats to people watch. Her unit happens to be on the corner near a really grassy courtyard path. When I had first moved in, I had noticed a man who started to give me a really off vibe. My cousins and aunts said that he lived upstairs 2 units over, and that he was apparently recovering from really hard drugs that permanently messed him up. His parents paid for him to stay there as they didn't really want him with them. They also said that other than hearing him mumble and say weird things, no one has ever really had an issue with him. My aunt works nights and she usually leaves at around 3 a.m. My younger cousin also works nights and he leaves at 2 a.m. That usually left my same age cousin and I, who are the only 2 there, until we leave for work around 8. For some context, it's a very open living room to dining room floor plan. My aunt always has people staying over, so she has a second couch right in the dining room instead of a table. This was where I slept. She stayed on the one in the living room. My aunt has also never been one to lock her doors. That is, until this incident. One night I'm on my phone trying to sleep at about 1 a.m., and I then hear a man yelling. He's yelling, "Don't shoot," and banging on the door to the right of ours. 2 male college students live there, and they told him he had the wrong apartment and to leave. He says sorry and walks off. I'm looking through the kitchen window, which is in the direct line of sight from my couch bed, and it's the really weird neighbor who then sees me and grins. He then walks back to his home. I was pretty unsettled, but not enough to wake anyone up over it. I had told my family nonchalantly the next day. My cousin and I watch a movie and head off to bed. I have a really hard time staying asleep, but I woke up this time to the feeling of someone watching me. I check my phone and it's around 3:30 a.m., so I know it's not my aunt or cousin. I decide to sit up and figure I'll go watch TV on my aunt's couch since she was already gone. As I'm in the living room, the feeling gets stronger. That's when I then see the shadow of a person standing still in the grass courtyard staring right in. I froze. I immediately go back to my couch to get my phone. As I do so, the person's gone. I'm now trying to calm myself down, thinking of waking up my cousin, when I then hear the creepy man's voice. He's now at the kitchen window, which looks out directly right in front of her front door. I drop to the floor out of his line of sight and start frantically trying to call my cousin. The man is now saying things at the window and front door like,
"I'm not going to hurt you. I'm unarmed,"
over and over again. His face is up against the window. He then starts talking about how he wants to pet the cats that he saw through the window. I can't get a hold of my cousin. At this point, it's been about 20 minutes of this. In this completely clown shit situation, I really didn't have many options. I could jump and run for a knife, but I need to go to the kitchen. I could try to respond and ask him to leave, but I've learned when you underestimate crazy, you always lose every time. I now hear him knocking and knocking while repeating his nonsense. I'm now doing that ridiculous looking snake slither across the floor down the hall now. I see the door handle start to turn. I'm about to jump up when my cousin bursts out of his room directly across from the front door. He starts yelling at the guy that he needs to get the hell off his porch and that he's calling the cops. The man tries to say,
"I'm unarmed. I'm not going to hurt you. Don't be afraid."
My cousin completely goes off yelling that that's freaking dandy, but it's 4 a.m. and that he really needs to leave or he's calling the cops. So the guy backs up with his hands in the air and finally leaves. Needless to say, we didn't go back to sleep. My aunt was called, who called the apartment manager. During the next day when I came home from work, I saw his parents there packing moving boxes in a truck from his place. Maybe he was trying to get me to open the door by seeming friendly. Maybe he had a bad trip and really wanted to pet a cat to feel better. I guess we'll never know. This happened last year when I, a 24-year-old female, was visiting my mom. My neighborhood is known for being really safe, or at least that's what my family thought. We've got a few problems with neighbors on both sides of our house. We live in a small town that's actually been growing due to the university that was built here. Because she teaches there, my mom lives across the street from the university. Our house has 2 floors and my room is on the 2nd floor. The window is right in front of our house, so you can actually see the street from it. Every night around midnight when I was going to sleep, I would always hear my dogs barking and growling. Whenever I went to see the window to see why they're barking, I could never see a thing. There's a lot of trees and bushes in front of my house, so maybe what was making them bark was hiding there. I don't know. This had went on for at least a week, and it was always at midnight. During this night, I was actually having a lot of trouble sleeping, so I was video chatting with my boyfriend. Right at midnight once again, my dogs had started barking like crazy. I was sitting right in front of my window and I couldn't really see anything unusual, but I did feel a really weird vibe. It was like I was about to discover what was hiding in my front yard and scaring my dogs. I turn off all the lights and stay still. I was watching the streets in a certain place that whoever was outside wouldn't be able to see me. My boyfriend was still video chatting with me, saying that maybe it was a fox or maybe a raccoon, because there actually is a lot of wildlife around where my mom lives, but I just knew it wasn't an animal. My boyfriend eventually went to sleep, but I kept looking at the window. It was about 1:30 when I then see something moving out of the bushes. It was a man wearing all black, crouched right behind the bushes. My body had froze, but I didn't want to call my mom to see it. I've already told her about the dogs going crazy in our front yard at the same time every night. But just like my boyfriend, she always thought it was an animal. So I was just there looking at him, but he couldn't see me. The man had started moving, but he was still bent over so that no one could see him. But since I was on the second floor, I could see him just fine. He crawled with his back right next to our fence until he reached the neighbor's gate. Right inside that gate, there was a car parked. What happened next was really fast, but he then lit up a Molotov cocktail and then tossed it right in the car. The car went up in flames like crazy, and I had finally called my mom to see what was happening. The man had ran away like a feral cat so fast down the street. My mom was calling the police as well as the firemen, but by the time they got here, the man was long gone. During the next day, my mom had got a call from the police officer that had actually came the night before. As it turns out, they apparently arrested the man that did it. He was apparently trying to convince his ex-wife to get back together with him. He told her he would do something really bad if she didn't get back with him, and I guess he did it. After that happened, she had then moved out in about a week. We never really talked to her, so I don't really know any more details. I really wish I could have done something before he set her car on fire, but I'm just really glad he got arrested. This happened to me about 6 years ago. I'm now 26 and I'm also married with 2 awesome kids. For some context, I'm a guy. This is what happened to me. I tried so many times to leave my ex-girlfriend, who we'll call Sarah. Whenever I would tell her that I wanted to see other people or that I should move out so that we have room to breathe, she would always go crazy and threaten to kill or cut herself or even drive her car off of a bridge. Mind you, where I live, there really isn't any bridges. Anyways, one day I run into my ex-girlfriend, who we'll call Rachel, at the mall. We ended on good terms, so we had actually talked like nothing happened. I had told Rachel about my situation with Sarah and how I really wasn't happy with her, and that I was really scared that she was going to do something to harm herself. Rachel told me if I was really worried that much that I should let one of her family members know. So one day during work, I called her on my lunch and told her we should have dinner and talk. I also ran to our place and got all of my things and my dogs and moved everything back into my parents' house. I know, that's really messed up, but you have to understand that she was crazy, like really crazy. When we went to dinner, I told her in public that we should break up because I just wasn't happy anymore. And to be honest, I really hadn't been for a while. I mean, we had been together for about 3 years and I just wasn't happy. I had actually told her a few months after we started dating that I thought we were better off as friends. Anyways, so we break up and I go back to my parents' house, which they really weren't happy about because they knew how she was and they were really scared that she was going to do something to the house, or maybe even worse. They wanted me to go to a family member's house instead, but I mean really, who would actually take 2 big dogs and me on top of this giant load of drama? Later that night, when me and my dad are talking in the living room, all of a sudden we hear the sound of my truck alarm then go off and the sound of glass break. My heart sank. I just knew it was Sarah. I go outside calmly trying to talk to her like an adult, and she just starts hitting me and spitting in my face, telling me I'm a piece of crap and all these other crazy things. I kid you not, I didn't touch her not one time, and I never raised my voice. I tried to get her to relax and at the same time telling my dad everything was okay. I can handle this, just go back inside. Finally, after about a half hour of just getting hit and yelled at, she eventually leaves, peeling out of my parents' neighborhood. Let's fast forward a few days later. I end up getting a visit from the cops asking where I was the night of this night and blah blah blah. You know how it goes. I tell them, but they don't believe me. They say that they want to take me downtown for some questions. Being the decent person that I am, I decide to go willingly. And well, what do you know? It turns out that she had filed a report on me saying that I beat her and also held her at gunpoint to get all of her money from her safe, and that I also wanted the PIN numbers to her card. For a while, I didn't even say anything because I was just so shocked at this point. I then tell the cops, "Look at me. I'm the one that has cuts and bruises here. She did that. I didn't do anything to her." Their response? "Sir, she's a lady. We have to hear her side on this, and we're gonna need to take some DNA samples from you." Well, I give them what they need, and long story short, I'm thrown in jail waiting for a hearing. About 2 weeks go by and the results came back, and you guessed it, totally negative. Also, I forgot to mention this, but me and Rachel ended up getting back together, but the harassment never stopped. Sarah made it impossible for me to move on with my life. For almost a year, I would get constant visits from cops asking why I was stalking her. Sarah even hired a private investigator to follow me and Rachel around. Every time I got a visit from a cop, I always had something backing me up on where I was whenever Sarah claimed I was stalking her. She had 4 restraining orders filed against me when I never even had anything to do with her. Finally, the judge was sick of it. I guess he had finally seen just how crazy she was, because he didn't issue any more restraining orders after that. Me and Rachel almost didn't make it through this. Sarah made my life hell, but I'm really glad I ended things with her. So Sarah, wherever you are, I really hope you find the help you need, and I pray and hope no other man ever has to go through this. I was dating this guy when I was in my 20s for about a year. When we first started dating, it was really fun. We had partied a bit too hard at times, but he was cool. I had gotten away from a really horrible relationship about 6 months prior to meeting him. His name was Eugene, and everyone called him Gene. His past relationship had involved his ex-girlfriend passing away. We eventually ended up getting an apartment together and moving in with each other very early in the relationship. I'll admit, things were moving along pretty quickly. He wanted to hang pictures of his dead ex-girlfriend Jennifer in our apartment to remember her by, which I really had no problem with. Jennifer had a cousin that would come visit Gene as well on occasion, and as time progressed, she had started coming over more and more. I didn't really care for her because she was really nasty and it seemed like she was always trying to get Gene alone with her. I thought it was really weird and it was a huge red flag because this was supposed to be the dead girl's cousin, so why would she want to have a sexual relationship with her dead cousin's ex-boyfriend? One day when we were all hanging out at the apartment, his phone started buzzing and he was getting a text message. The cousin that was sitting about 2 feet away from us had actually went to our bathroom and then took a picture of her private and sent it to Gene while I was sitting right beside him. I don't know what his dead ex and her cousin and him were into, but that definitely wasn't what I was into, so I then kicked him and her both to the curb. He had to move in with her grandmother because she didn't even have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of, so right into Grandma's house they both moved in. On most days, Gene had tried coming to my work and following me around, trying to get back together with me. Eventually I had him blocked on everything and the calls and harassment finally stopped and I just stopped seeing him. So I was watching the local news about 2 months later and he and the girl cousin had broken into some old couple's home, tied them to chairs with duct tape, stole items from their home, took their ATM card, then drove the older couple at gunpoint right to the bank to withdraw money from their account. They were both apprehended and spent some time in jail, but obviously not long enough. I was working as a manager at a barbecue place near my new home, and lo and behold, who comes through the drive-thru? When I first heard the voice, I didn't really recognize him, but when I then saw him at the drive-thru window, my heart stopped. Then the calls to my job started up. I decided to say screw it and just start my own business. And let's just really hope he's moved on as well. I really have no intentions of ever talking to that scumbag ever again. And I'm also happy to say that I totally changed my preferences on dating. That's how I met my husband, and we've been happily married for 12 years now. I now avoid all people named Gene. So to preface this story, I was young. Maybe about 18 to 19 years old, and I had no idea what we were getting into. So my father owns 3 businesses, and he was actively dating his business partner as well as providing for her. She also made advances on me, which kinda creeped me out. She would buy us all food, and at first I was really grateful, but then I started becoming nervous as she wanted to be alone with me like a lot. My father ended up getting married, but he didn't tell her, and she got really upset at him and told me not to tell her. She came to my job and then demanded to see my father, which I told her he wasn't there. She then screamed at me, and then she told me that we would regret this. Due to the disturbing nature of this, I called the cops, but all they really did was take my name. They didn't actually look into it. So fast forward a bit. I come home at around midnight, and I had just gotten back from my second job. I was absolutely dead tired from school and work, and I eventually crashed on my bed. It had to be at least 3 in the morning when I heard my door open. At first I didn't move because I thought it was just my cat Misty pawing at the door, as she liked to sleep in bed with me. When I groaned out her name and she didn't answer, it struck me as strange, but I really wasn't that worried. That is, until I then felt a presence standing over me. I quickly woke up and discovered my father's crazy ex in her house standing above me crazy-eyed. She was screaming like crazy, saying she was going to get revenge on my father. I quickly rolled out of bed, ran right past her, and then called the authorities. She openly tried to fight my father's wife and even tried to stab my dad. The police eventually arrived and then arrested her right on the spot. That was the scariest crap that I've ever been through, and I'm really glad that I won't see her again. I now sleep with a knife and a taser next to my bed. Please be careful. You really never know who will pay you a late night visit. I'm a female, so I was in a pretty terrifying relationship when I was really young. I had gotten married when I was 17 years old to my boyfriend of 3 years. I'm just gonna call him Dave, but Dave was a freaking psycho. He was really obsessed with blood, occult things, and Charles Manson. He would always say things like,
"If you ever leave me, they better watch out for missing redheads on the news, because I'm gonna Ted Bundy your ass."
When I finally did leave him though, it was really scary. He tried to kill himself. He slit open his arm and then wrote my name in his blood on our sheets and on my wall. I still had to stay there for a couple of days to pack my things, but I was so terrified that he was going to kill me or himself. He kept saying things like,
"If I can't have you, no one can.
and
In another world, we can try again."
I mean, what the hell? I would also wake up to him standing over my bed while I was sleeping. One night I woke up to the sound of him saying,
"If I can't have her, no one can."
I froze. I was really scared. I had peeked open my eyes, but not enough to where he would know I was awake. He was standing over me with a large knife from our kitchen, and he was tracing the tip of the knife up and down his arm and whispering things to himself. I then turned toward him and opened my eyes. We then made eye contact and he stopped whispering. He started to walk toward me and I just said, "Please don't do this," and he stopped. He stared at me for a while, then walked to the stairs/door of my room. He then turned around at the door and just started staring at me for a while, with the knife still in his hands. I really didn't know if I was going to die or not. After a few minutes, he just walked down the stairs and went to sleep. Yeah, I'm really glad I got away from that one. So I was staying in my aunt's apartment one day because my mom had to go to a doctor's appointment and also had some errands, and she didn't want to leave us home alone. My brother and I are around 6 and 8 years old. So we were there for a few hours when we had heard a very powerful knock. So my aunt goes to check out who it is. Now the door wasn't locked, so before she even gets there, her old ex walks in forcefully, rushes straight to her, then pins her to the floor and starts beating her. We just stood there in shock, not knowing what to do, watching as she screamed for help and he was attacking her. Luckily, in one of the neighboring apartments, 3 younger guys in their 20s had heard her, rushed right over, and then beat the living crap out of him. He was extremely bruised up and bleeding and knocked out cold, and he actually had to be taken away in a stretcher. Shortly afterwards, they locked him up. I don't know what we would have done if those guys didn't show up when they did. Thank God for that. When I was about 8 years old, my sister, who was 18 at the time, had brought home her new boyfriend. He was around 30 years old, which kind of concerned my mom, but it really wasn't that abnormal for my sister to do this. At this point in her life, she was really falling rapidly in a deep depression. Drugs and one-night stands were really common for her at this time, so having an actual boyfriend seemed a lot better than my mom not knowing where she was every night. The boyfriend was very nice to us, and especially to me. He and my sister had took me to a lot of different places. He bought quite expensive gifts for me, and my 8-year-old self really liked this. This'll be relevant later. I even went to his house one time for a sleepover, but of course my sister was there with me. I should also tell you that I really never got any kind of creepy vibes from him. He never said anything weird or creepy as far as I can remember. Let's fast forward to the day they broke up. It's quite a blur, so I don't really remember all of it, but I do remember him showing up at our house and my sister refusing to let him in. My mom wasn't home at the time, but it was still pretty light out, and luckily we were really close with our neighbors. My other sister, who was around 13 or 14, kind of locked herself in her room, but every now and then she would walk up to our older sister and ask if he left. Now, I was a very curious kid, and I had no clue what was going on. I saw my older sister very distraught and really snappy towards me. Pretty understandable since I was constantly following her and asking her questions. I remember looking out my mom's window while my sister tried to push my head out of sight. Her boyfriend had yelled at her that he'd come all this way and something about the police, though I can't really remember what. He then left shortly after. Years later, the thought of this came back into my mind, and I finally asked my mom about it. What she told me left me totally shocked. Apparently, my sister had found child pornography on his phone. It still gives me the shivers thinking about how nice he was to me, and why my sister tried to keep me out of view that night. I know this isn't as scary as most of the stories you hear, but I still thought I'd share it. This story takes place in December of 2019. I was on winter break from my senior year of college, and I decided to go visit a good friend of mine who lived about an hour and a half away from me. Her parents are pretty strict about having boys in the house, even though we're just friends. Because of this, we decided to meet at a park that was under a bridge that wasn't too far away from her house. The park itself isn't under the bridge, but the parking lot is. When I pulled into the parking lot, there were about 6 or 7 other cars there, and I wasn't entirely sure which one was hers. Keep in mind, it's about 7:30 p.m. in December at this point, so it was already almost pitch black out. I parked in a somewhat secluded spot about 5 spots away from the nearest car. I sent her a text, and it turns out that she was in that very car. I walked over to her car, she got out, we hugged, and then I hopped in the passenger seat. It took me a couple of minutes to stop shivering since it was really freaking cold outside. So we're sitting there talking and just catching up for about 25 minutes when I decide to lay my seat all the way back. I'm a pretty tall guy, and I was a little cramped up in the front seat. My friend then did the same, but she only laid back about halfway. About another 10 minutes go by, and seemingly out of nowhere, 2 guys walk right over by the driver's side of the car, like not even 2 feet away. I could only see their heads since I was laid back so low. One guy was about average height and in his 30s, while the other guy was really short and husky and seemed a lot older. This had only lasted for about a split second, but I could 100% tell that the younger guy was looking directly into the car. I sort of brushed it off because the park wasn't exactly dead at this point, but it was a little weird that they walked so close to our car when there were no other vehicles close to us. I mean, besides my car. My friend, however, didn't brush this off, as she told me she made direct eye contact with both of the men. I then sat up to see where the men had gone, but they were completely out of sight at this point. It was extremely dark out, and the only sources of light were a few street lamps that lit up certain parts of the parking lot. My friend put her seat all the way back up, and I put mine to the halfway point. She was still pretty nervous for a couple of minutes, but we quickly forgot about it and just continued talking. Another 20 or so minutes went by when I noticed headlights moving around the parking lot. I had turned my head to look out the rear driver's side window, and I saw a silver Kia Soul heading straight for us. Now when I pulled in, I saw that same Kia Soul parked right next to the exit, and there was no reason for whoever was driving to come across the parking lot to where we were parked at. Well, of course, this car pulled into a spot literally one over from where we were. I sat up and looked at it and saw the short older man from earlier. He was alone in the car and was just scrolling through what looked like Facebook on his phone. I still wasn't very alarmed at this point, but my friend said that she was really uncomfortable on how close he was, especially since he had just walked by earlier. I told her if she was really that uncomfortable to just wait a few minutes, then move to a different spot. So right behind where we parked was the small fenced-in area with a bunch of construction equipment inside. I told her to just go around and park on the other side of that. She did just that and turned off the headlights when we got to the other side. All of that big equipment was really perfect for blocking us from that guy's view, but it also blocked the light from the street lamps as well, making it now about 20 times darker where we were. I don't really mind the dark, so I made myself comfortable again and laid my seat back. Well, not even 5 minutes go by, and she then sees the figure of a person then emerging from the side of the fence. I decide to sit up a little bit, and even though it was dark out, I could make it out to be the younger guy from earlier. He passed by my side of the car, but he wasn't as close as before, and he didn't even look in our direction this time. The weirdest thing about it was that he was walking straight towards a patch of grass that was completely covered in darkness, and he was also completely hidden from our sight. Now, I tend to try and rationalize things whenever I see people doing weird things in public. So I just laid back down and told my friend that he was probably just taking a leak or something. Well, 30 seconds later, she tells me that he's coming back, and by the time I sat up again, he was past us. But she told me that this time he was looking straight into the car yet again. At this point, I put my seat all the way back so if something weird happens again, I would be ready. Well, nothing really weird happened for a good 45 minutes. We decided to both get in the back seat because there was more room back there, and we could also both keep an eye out. Right when we were both starting to forget the weird men, that same freaking silver Kia Soul then pulled around the fence. We were in literally the back corner of the parking lot, so there was really absolutely no reason for this car to come back there if he wasn't actually following us. I saw the car first because my friend was looking for something on her phone, and the only words I could muster were, "No way." She looked at me, then out the window, and started to freak out. Now, the cherry on top of this whole situation for us was that as soon as his headlights landed on our car, he then switched them off, leaving us in yet again complete darkness. I followed the outline of the car, and to my horror, it literally parked right next to us. My friend was on the verge of tears at this point, while I myself had started to feel a different emotion. My face became red hot with anger, and I jumped in the driver's seat and rolled down the window, staring right at the guy. His face was dimly lit up from his dash lights, and when his eyes wandered over to meet mine, he looked a little startled, like he wasn't even expecting me to be there. I then yelled to him, "Hey, do you have a problem, dude?" He said nothing and just looked down at his phone, typed something, then put his car in the reverse and drove off. I actually got out of the car at this point to see where he was going. When I rounded the fence, I saw the younger guy get into the passenger seat, and then they drove out of the park. I walked back to the car, drove her car over to mine, then followed her to a more populated area. Pretty much for weeks, we couldn't figure out why those two guys were stalking us around in this parking lot, and why that guy was so startled to see me. We kinda gave up trying to figure it all out until I was telling another friend the story, and then it all hit me. Every time those guys walked by the car, I was never visible to them, only my friend was. During the first time, my seat was all the way down, so none of the light from outside was hitting me. She even said they both made eye contact with her. When the younger guy looked in the second time, my seat was down again, so he only saw her when he looked in. This explains why my presence was such a surprise when I confronted the man in the car. So these two guys thought they saw a girl sitting alone in her car in a dark parking lot and then planned on doing God knows what to her. All of the possibilities still rattle around in my head. Could they have been kidnappers or maybe human traffickers? Or maybe they were just a couple of lowlifes who thought they could rob a girl sitting by herself. Either way, I'm really glad I made my presence known before they got the chance to do whatever it was they were planning on doing. This happened about a week ago and spans over the entire week. My family and I usually take vacations about once a year. This year we went to a state that we often visit, but we stayed at a different campground than usual. When we first arrived at the campground, we were greeted by the owner, who seemed really kind. She told us of all the tourist attractions that were close by, what the campground offered, and gave us a tour. She even told us some really interesting stories as well. We felt very welcomed, that is, until we actually got to see our cabins. When we walked inside, it absolutely reeked of must and gasoline, and better yet, everything was wet. The floors, the furniture, the blankets, and even the beds. We just assumed that it was from cleaning, so we decided to let the cabin air out while we went into town. During the same night as we had a campfire, we had noticed a golf cart that was constantly driving around our cabin. My dad had flagged him down and asked why he was circling our cabin, and all he said back was,
"I just want to make sure you guys are settling in okay, especially the pretty girl,"
he had said as he pointed in my direction. Now, I'm a 5'1" and somewhat chubby 17-year-old girl. I'm definitely not the prettiest, but I'm also not terrible looking. I get comments like this all the time, but I just got a really terrible feeling from this guy. My dad told him off, and we called it a night after this. The next few days, nothing really happened. We were just constantly being followed around the site by this strange man. Even after my dad told the owner, nothing was ever done about this guy. On the 5th night, it was really storming really badly. I had woke up at around 3 a.m. to a tapping on my window. At first, I just assumed it was the bush that was outside the window, so I just fell back asleep. Then I was awoken a second time. This time, however, the man that was following us the past few days was standing in the doorway to my room just watching me sleep. I was frozen in fear. I knew screaming for my dad probably wouldn't help since how loud the storm was, so I pretty much just laid there just hoping this man wouldn't know I was awake. Luckily, my dad wakes up pretty often in the night to check on my siblings and he actually caught the man. We eventually called the cops and he was arrested. Earlier today, my dad had told me that the man was actually the owner's son, and he was apparently just released from prison for molesting a child and sexual misconduct. If my dad would have never woken up, I really can't begin to imagine what would have happened to me, and I can't be more grateful for him. Let's just say right after this happened, we immediately left the campground. And to that creepy man that broke into our cabin and was watching me sleep, I really hope to never see you again. And to the owner who didn't stop her son from following us, you should really be ashamed of yourself. The story takes place back when I was in 8th grade, right around 2010. All of this started one day when I was at the store with my older sister. For some background, I was the typical emo kid in middle school, and I really didn't have that many friends in my smallish southern town. As we were leaving the store, a teenage guy who looked kind of goth had approached me and told me he thought I was cute, and he asked for my number. I was really so excited to meet someone who liked me that I gave him my number right away without even thinking about it. He gave me a hug, then left. After he walked away, my sister told me that he gave her really bad vibes and I just really needed to stay away from him. Being naive and lonely, I ignored her and I started texting him immediately when he finally texted me. At first, things seemed normal, but it didn't really take long to get weird. We kind of just casually talked about our lives and how our day had been. That's when he then told me that he was 17. I told him I was only 13, which I was sure would be a deal breaker, but he didn't care. He ended up telling me that he was temporarily couch surfing because apparently his mom had kicked him out. I felt really bad for him and I told him this, but being 13 years old, there was really not much I could do. He then went on to beg me to let him stay with me. I then told him my parents would never let him. He then kept asking for my address and trying to get me to sneak out to go meet him. One night he repeatedly asked me for photos of my feet, even though I told him no multiple times. I eventually blocked his number because it was just getting way too weird for me, and I just felt unsafe. I ended up seeing him around town for a few more times at large music gatherings. Every time he would always follow me or attempt to talk to me, but I was always smart enough to run or hide. Other than being really creepy, these times were all pretty uneventful to me. Fast forward a few years when I see his face in the news. He got thrown in jail for taking photos of women with his cell phone while they were using public restrooms all over town, and his real age was listed in the paper as well. I don't remember exactly how old he was at the time, just that it made me realize that he was definitely older than 17 when he talked to me when I was 13. What a creep. So yeah, he definitely had some issues, but I really hope he gets the help he needs. For some context, I'm a 20-year-old female, and I started an OnlyFans account over the summer to support myself through school, and things were really great until I posted my Amazon wish list. Now, Amazon doesn't release your address to people who gift you items, but well, third-party sellers can, and that's where I went wrong. By the way, I'm not trying to promote it here. This is a very frightening story, and I really felt like it should be shared. Around late July, I got a puppy. One night around 2 a.m., I took him outside to go to the bathroom. While he was doing his business, I had noticed a car that was parked outside my family's home. I saw a figure in the car and I could tell they were looking at me, but I couldn't really make out their face because it was pitch black out. Feeling a bit uneasy, I picked up my puppy and took him back inside. When I started to move though, the car then parked right in my driveway. I sprinted back inside and locked the door, but they never did approach my house. During the next morning, I went to check the mail. There was an envelope addressed to my OnlyFans name with $20 in it, but no note. I was currently still at home with my parents who had no idea about my OnlyFans account, so I didn't mention it to them. So about a week later, I had moved back to my college town to get ready to start school. During this time, I had decided to stop posting for the time being until I could figure out how they got my address. I've watched enough crime shows to definitely know that there's a possibility I could be in danger. I also live in a duplex with a gated parking lot for reference. One morning, I was planning on vlogging my trip to Target because I was planning on starting a YouTube channel in the near future, since OnlyFans felt so unsafe for me. When I got to my car, it had totally been ransacked and my vlogging camera was missing. I know, it's my fault for leaving it in the car, but I was using it the night before and since I live in a gated area, I didn't really think it would be unsafe. It wasn't in plain sight either. I had hidden it in my glove box. I used that camera to film my content, and the SD card that was in there had all my unreleased photos and videos. I know that they stole it just for the SD card. This is where the story really gets weird. There's cameras outside in the parking lot, so we were able to watch this person break into my car and find the camera, and they didn't touch any of the other 7 cars on the lot. They knew which car was mine, which suggests that they had been watching me for a while. After they got the camera, they walked around the duplex until stopping right at my window. My bedroom faces an outside street and my blinds are broken, so it's really easy to see in. I have a curtain, but it doesn't cover my window all the way. This person literally watched me sleep for about an hour or so. I really have no idea why they didn't try to break in, but thank God they didn't. This person then sold my camera to a pawn shop, and since I knew the serial number, the police were able to find it. However, my SD card was still missing. I believe the police are still trying to track them down, but I've broken my lease and moved to a new place. so I'm just really hoping that's enough to keep me safe. I live in a house that's really huge and beautiful, but there's just one problem. I'm often home alone, and well, our house has really giant windows. I'm a 23-year-old girl that's going to college nearby, and I live at home in order to afford school. My mom and stepdad have much more of a fun nightlife than I do, and they often go out of town. We live on a lake in a really nice private lake neighborhood that's supposed to be monitored, but it often isn't due to really lazy patrolmen. I have no self-defense because I'm so small. In a neighboring town, we have another house, and I used to live in it. We bought it so that I could have lived close to my college, as it's about 3 streets away from it. I had a stalker there that would always leave me gifts, footprints by my window, and letters. I knew who she was. She had been a classmate at my college that didn't want to accept that I had no interest in dating girls. I filed a police report, and we've actually been called a few times because she's apparently been seen entering our backyard, even though we haven't been back to that house in a while. I definitely know that gut feeling whenever I'm being watched. So I'm back at our main house due to that experience, and I've been here for a few months now. It's about 40 minutes away from our other house, and it's extremely difficult to find. We live on a road that's absolutely impossible to find on a GPS, and really only my closest friends have been out here to visit. About 2 weeks ago, I called the cops. I had been home alone sitting upstairs, and I saw a figure in our yard, and then I heard the doorknobs being rattled downstairs shortly after. After the cops showed up 45 minutes later from getting lost, they didn't find anyone and assumed someone was attempting to break in. Whoever it was definitely saw me because our windows are huge and located everywhere. This house was custom built for my mom and stepdad. We have giant windows everywhere, including all of the bedrooms. Some of our windows are so big because they had previously belonged to an old church at 17 feet high. Even my room has 4 large windows that luckily fits blinds, but most of our windows are way too big for blinds or curtains. Basically what I'm trying to say here is pretty much everyone can see into our house, whether they're in our front yard, backyard, in their boats, etc. It doesn't matter. They can definitely see into a big portion of the house, and the house itself is huge. There's 8 doors that I constantly check to always make sure they're locked. I have 2 dogs, one of them being an English bulldog. About a week ago, I had just gotten home and I found a framed art print of a bulldog. It also had saran wrap wrapped around it. There was no note and no context to it, so we have no idea who left it. I'm an artist myself, and I often share pictures of my bulldog, so I really feel that it's aimed towards me. We asked all of our friends, family, and even the neighbors, but nobody knows who left it. Tonight I finished some assignments and I immediately laid down in bed. After about 20 minutes, I then heard knocks on my window. My dog was in the hallway and started barking as soon as it happened. After laying down for about 10 minutes frozen in fear, I got up to try and see if there was someone out there lurking in the dark. There wasn't from what I could tell. This all happened tonight and I'm still really scared. The cops always take so long to get here and they would probably just get lost again. I've called my older brother and also messaged my friends to let them all know what's going on. All 8 doors are locked. I triple checked them. I just really want to know what the hell's going on around here. Who the hell tapped on my window and who left this painting? This happened about 2 weeks ago, or sometime around the beginning of the month. I, a 15-year-old female, and my 13-year-old little sister were staying at my older sister's apartment for a day. She had just gotten a kitten and she needed us to watch her for a day. So we went over to her apartment one night and would stay overnight, and then the next day until she came home from work. As you can all guess, due to COVID, me and my sister are doing school virtually, so we just brought our school laptops and supplies with us. My older sister had left for work that morning, sometime around 6 to 6:30 a.m. I believe. Me and my younger sister woke up at around 7 and we started getting ready for school. Before my older sister left for work, she had locked the door behind her. This'll be important later. There's also a chain on the door, but I mean, it obviously can't be accessed from outside of the apartment. One of the very first things I did that morning on instinct was to put the chain on the door. I tend to be an overly careful person, so it was just natural for me to do this. One thing that I really remember specifically was that I didn't even touch the lock on the door, just the chain. I wasn't really sure if it was locked or not, and I didn't want to accidentally unlock it. So I went with the idea that my older sister most likely already locked it, and that I shouldn't have to mess with it. I didn't really think anything of it afterwards. Me and my younger sister decided it would be easier to focus if we were working in different rooms of the apartment, so she took my older sister's bedroom and I decided to stay in the living room. Now, the living room is the first room you walk into when you open the front door. The whole space is pretty open and goes into a small kitchen and a den. Right past the den is the bedroom, so me and my sister weren't really that far apart from each other. Anyway, let's skip ahead about 2 hours. My class was just about to end and I started to hear this really violent banging on the front door. At first, I thought maybe I was just misinterpreting where the noise was coming from, and I thought maybe it was someone banging on a different door right next to us. We weren't expecting anyone to be there or anything, and my mind didn't immediately pick up that someone could want to get in for whatever reason. I assumed that maybe someone got locked out of their apartment next to us or something, and was trying to just wake up their roommate. Probably not super logical of me, but I was starting to get really nervous. The banging was extremely loud now, but I never heard a voice. I also want to add that I was only a few feet away from the door, so if someone would have said something, I definitely would have heard it. The banging then went on for about 5-ish minutes, maybe even a little more. I was definitely freaked out, but I decided not to move. I texted my little sister during the whole thing, and I told her that someone was banging on the door. She told me she could hear it too, and she thought that maybe I had dropped something. Then I told her that I was starting to get really freaked out. Then it stopped. For maybe about 2 minutes, there was nothing but silence. I thought maybe that was the end of it, but after that 2 minutes, it just started right back up again. I was still in my math class. My teacher's trying to tell us about the homework, and there's someone violently banging on the door right next to me. I was getting panicky now. I start wondering if I'm gonna die or something, but just ignore it and try and focus on my teacher. The banging continued for another maybe 5 to 7 minutes, and right in the middle of it, I think I heard a click. If I could describe it, it almost sounded like a door unlocking. But I thought there was no way that could be it. I'm just being irrational. I start to kind of joke to myself to just watch as the door handle would dramatically slowly turn and then the door would open. Well, about a second later, I watched as that exact scenario then happened in real time. I froze. The door handle was then opened slowly. The room was silent. I didn't dare say anything. I was just way too scared beyond belief. The door had started to open, but not all the way because I had put the chain on it earlier that morning. The door was now at a slight angle so that I couldn't see the person, but I don't think they could have seen me either. I mean, not unless they put their face right through the door or something. After about 3 seconds of silence, the door slowly shut and the banging just stopped. I got up immediately to go lock the door. What's so great about this is that I was so nervous that I just ignored the fact that someone literally tried to break into the apartment. My teacher, peers, even my own sister were all just kind of oblivious to the fact that we were just in real danger just now. After both of our classes finally ended, me and my younger sister started talking about it. She also texted my older sister and told her what happened. We literally just went on with our day like nothing happened, and when my older sister got home that day, she had started asking us more about it. I had started to tell her the story in more detail, and as she drove us home, she had called who I believed was the landlord. So as it turns out, A few weeks before this happened, my sister had called for maintenance so that they could come to her apartment and fix one of her bathrooms. So she thought maybe it was them. When she called the landlord, she asked if the maintenance would give her notice or let her know beforehand if they were coming. She also asked if they would let her know that it was maintenance, just so she would know who it was. To be honest, I don't really remember the woman's response to my sister's first question, but she definitely said maintenance would call out to her or something. My sister also mentioned that the banging was so violent that the door frame had actually been damaged. The woman said that their staff wouldn't ever damage the property. Now remember when I said I heard a click and the door unlocked? Well, maintenance has a key to every door. My sister had her key as well as the spare one. The woman said she would talk to maintenance and ask if they had been there, to which they later confirmed they hadn't. We also asked if the locks ever got changed. They said they were changed as soon as the last tenant left, so it definitely wasn't someone who used to live there and still had a key or something. I really have no idea how this person unlocked the door. It's crazy to me. The woman recommended that if she found out that it was a maintenance, that we should definitely file a police report. I think it was maybe a day later. My older sister was leaving for work again. She realized as she was leaving that she forgot her water bottle, and she went back to go grab it. She made sure to lock her door again as she left. She was pretty freaked out from the previous event and was really hyper-vigilant, so we're pretty damn sure that she locked it on her way out. Well, she got back home from work that day and found that the door to her apartment was wide open. After this event, I believe she finally filed the police report. I just really hate that I acted so stupidly. I should have called the police right as that second wave of banging hit. At any moment, I could have looked through the peephole. I could have seen this person's face. Maybe if I had moved or gotten up even just a little, I could have gotten a look at them. But I was so scared that I just froze. I know what I should have done in this situation. Call the police, maybe grab a knife from the kitchen or some sort of weapon, hide, etc. But in that moment, I didn't do anything. I really don't think that I even fully comprehended just how much danger I was in until the door opened. I hoped that if I didn't say anything, they would just leave. And well, I guess they did. I know I should be trying to go easy on myself. Taking that into consideration, I'm still only 15 years old. I've never been in a situation like that before. I've never really been trained for that sort of situation. I mean, unless you want to include scary movies or something. Funnily enough though, I guess I'm the dumb person in a horror movie. I don't do anything smart in the face of danger, and there's also the fact that I have pretty severe anxiety. I've never been formally diagnosed with anything, but I know that I definitely have an unhealthy relationship with it, to say the least. I have really bad anxiety on an almost daily basis, and I've had multiple panic attacks as well. I've missed so much school, and at one point I even went to see a therapist about it when I was 13. I was tested on the adult anxiety test, and my therapist actually told me that it was concerningly high. So to say that I can't properly deal with emotions is fair. I think that's one of the biggest reasons why I didn't do anything. I thought I was being irrational. I'm just so used to thinking that I'm blowing something out of proportion that I assumed I was just doing it again. Then again, maybe I'm just trying to justify my stupidity. I guess I'm just still really annoyed with myself, like I could have done better. The only thing I can really do now is just to hope that nothing like this ever happens again. But if it does, I know what to do now. So far, me and my family have a few theories. We figured this person maybe learned my older sister's routine and thought nobody would be home. Once the door opened and he saw the chain, he realized that people were inside and then left. We also thought that maybe he got in by taking an old key or something and jammed it into the lock, and then banged on it to unlock it. Maybe he somehow got a key to the apartment though. I thought for a while maybe when I put the chain on, I really did unlock the door. I don't think so though. I'm really not sure of anything at this point. These are all just theories and we're not professionals by any means. If anything else happens, I'll definitely give an update. This happened to me about 2 weeks ago. I had started university in September and therefore live in a students-only apartment complex. There's about 4 other apartments in my hallway, and sometimes we just spend time in each other's apartments. I had the absolute chance to lose my keys during the first week of university. It wasn't really a big deal though, I just simply paid for another key. After about a week in my apartment though, I had started to notice that some of my things weren't in the same place as I thought that I'd put them. It didn't really scare me though, because I know I'm a distracted person. On the day of the incident in question, I was coming home earlier than usual with another student named Thomas, the boy that lives in the apartment next to mine. We got inside, and when I unlocked my door, I had saw a woman right inside my apartment. As you can expect, it really scared me. But right as I was about to ask her what the hell she was doing there, she then told me, "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you'd be home this early. I'm the janitor. I clean the rooms weekly." She then just smiled at me and went out. Now, I didn't even know we had a janitor, but this kind of explained why my stuff was moving around. Thomas then noticed that she had left her keys on my desk and said that I should give them back to her. When I took a closer look though, I then realized that those were my lost keys. The night then passed and I decided to talk to the man in charge of the complex about this. I told him that the janitor had lost my keys and I asked for my money back. He just looked at me in total incomprehension and he then told me, "But we don't even have a janitor." Right at that moment, I just froze. Then who the hell went in my apartment for the past few weeks? Why was she there? We didn't call the police because, nothing had been stolen. But I still decided to search for cameras in my apartment, because you just never really know with these psychopaths. I haven't seen her since, and I'm really glad to know that she can't enter the complex anymore without the badge on the keys. So yeah, that was a really creepy experience. I was a high school student living with my mother in a 3rd-floor apartment. I used to sleep in the living room because the apartment only had 1 bedroom, and well, it was my mom's. I was pretty happy with the little space I had though, and I was a really happy kid. I always got up at about 6 a.m. to go to school, and my mom always got up at 5 a.m. to have time to shower and make breakfast before then dropping me off at school and heading to work. During that morning, I remember waking up and all the lights were on. Every single one of them, even the one in my room. I went to grab my phone, but it wasn't there. Okay, pretty odd. I headed to the bathroom and I saw that all the drawers and doors of every furniture we had were open. I was deeply confused at this point. Anyways, my mom came out of the bathroom and she asked me what the hell I had been doing. I told her I had no idea what she was talking about, and I thought that she did it since she was always up at least 1 hour earlier than me. I had also asked her if she had seen my cell phone, since I still didn't really know where it was. Then I saw it. Deep inside her green eyes, the realization. I could distinctly see the fear and all the pieces inside her head clicking in place. She then leaped to the kitchen and found the window wide open, a kitchen knife on the ground, and some really dusty fingerprints on the wall where someone had put weight on to climb inside. It was then when my sleepy-headed self had put the pieces together too. Someone somehow climbed all the way up to our balcony, got inside the apartment, and then robbed us. All while I was asleep in my bed right there in the living room. My mom hugged me and asked me if I was okay. I said that I never heard anything and that I didn't even wake up when this unknown person turned on the lights and rummaged through our stuff. It was super weird. They didn't dare to try and open my mom's bedroom door, so she didn't notice a thing. My grandma claims that it was some angel that protected me that night, and that's why I didn't wake up. But I don't believe in that stuff. I don't think they knew I was there either. The police never found the robber, and we ended up putting steel bars on the window. We ended up moving some time after that. This all happened to me when I was still in high school. It's been about 6 years since that happened. My mother and I have moved from that apartment, and I'm now grown and living with my boyfriend. But even today, I'm still really paranoid, and I always wonder why I didn't wake up, even though I'm really grateful that I didn't. Thank God for that. Last Sunday, I was at my boyfriend's apartment for the weekend. The boyfriend left to go to work at about 8 a.m., but not before giving me a kiss on the head. This had woke me up, but by the time I could open my eyes, he was already gone and out the door. He had actually forgot to lock the apartment door on his way out, to which I hadn't realized. I got up, put my contacts in, brushed my teeth, and then put my workout clothes on. I started my day off right with some good squats and crunches. Then I made myself some coffee and toast. I decided to hop on the computer to look up some hotels and restaurants. Me and my boyfriend wanted to take a little in-state vacation, so that's why I was doing this. Now, the entry door leads directly to the open kitchen and living room area, which is where his PC is. I start to hear the sound of the door handle turning, and I get really excited thinking that maybe my boyfriend is coming home for an early lunch. It was about 10 a.m. at this point. The door quickly opens, and I see an older man then step in. He looked to be in about his 60s or 70s. My first thought was maybe he's the electrician that the landlord said was going to be stopping by, but I thought that it was odd that he didn't even knock, and the fact that he wasn't even wearing pants. Luckily, he was wearing underwear though. This guy then speed walked into the apartment with a really glossed over look. I was mostly polite in the beginning, then saying, "Sir, who are you? What are you doing here? This isn't your apartment." I then progressively began shouting and cussing him out, but nothing would faze him. He went straight into the dining table over a large cardboard box that my boyfriend had full of board games. He then sat on them. He literally sat on the games. It looked like he was going to take a dump on them or something, but then he just tried laying down on the games. I then got up and ran to the bathroom, absolutely terrified for my safety as I'm only about 5'2", and definitely not as strong as I'd like to think I am. This guy was about 6 foot, and God knows how many drugs he was on. I dialed 911 and informed the operator on everything that happened, as I'm totally shaking at this point. She asked if I'd be able to safely leave the bathroom to let the police in. I told her it was no need and that it was unlocked, as that's how the guy got in the first place, then gave a little laugh, to which she then laughed too. I heard the cops at the door, but they were talking to each other. I opened the bathroom door, then peeked into the living room. No guy. I got really nervous about checking the bedroom because I'd have to go around a corner and I wouldn't really be able to see that well. That's when I suddenly hear, "Sir, where are your pants at?" from the hallway. I'm standing right at the door to listen and texting my boyfriend everything that's happened. They eventually got the guy in cuffs, and the druggie just kept shouting how they were hurting his hands. The officers then ask him where he lives and what he's doing here. As it turns out, the guy apparently lives about 7 streets away, and he says he's just trying to go to bed. Well, that's definitely not happening here. My boyfriend came home shortly after and comforted me. We went downstairs to see if the police needed my statement before they took off with the guy. I couldn't believe their response.
"Nah, don't worry about it. We already got it from 3 other people."
We found out that he went into every unlocked apartment that he could. An officer walked by with a gallon Ziploc bag completely full of pill bottles. We found his pants and shoes in the hallway. Please, everyone, always lock your doors. Okay, so it was finally my turn to take my kids trick-or-treating. The previous year it was my wife's, and we trade back and forth like every year. My son and daughter are age 7 and 9. Usually I stay on the street while my kids go to the different houses to collect candy. After about a half an hour of walking around, we came to one of the more popular hotspots for candy collecting. A main street right in the neighborhood. Lots of really cool decorations and animatronics on people's lawns. So I became a bit distracted and I stopped watching my kids closely. At one point, they had came back from a house accompanied by another girl about the same height as my daughter. She was wearing a really weird homemade mask, like some kind of cardboard cutout or something. My daughter then asked if she could go trick-or-treat with us. So I said sure, and we carried on together as a group. I didn't know who this girl was, but I figured she was just a friend from school or something. As we continued, I started to notice a really large man trailing us. He was wearing some sort of angry cat mask. It was kind of creepy, to be honest. I thought that maybe he was the father of the girl, so I tried to start up some small chat with him. I think I said something like, nice weather, huh? But he didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me while our kids went up the stairs to the next house. I tried again, then asking, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He then nodded, but he still didn't say anything. I figured he just wasn't in the mood for chatting, so I just stopped trying. We carried on for about another 15 minutes until suddenly my kids came up to me and said that they wanted to go home now. This really surprised me as we hadn't even been out for too long, and I mean their bags were only about a third full. In any case, I agreed. We then waved goodbye at the man in the cat mask as well as his daughter and then started on our way home. The really weird thing is that when I glanced back at the man and his daughter, they were just standing there staring at us. I went to check one more time as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not having moved at all. At this point, I decided to ask my kids, "So, who was that girl?" My daughter then looked up at me with a really confused look on her face. "She's your friend," my daughter replied. Pretty confused, I asked her what she meant by that. Apparently, the girl with the cardboard mask had approached my kids and said that she was a friend of mine. She then went on to tell my daughter that she was too shy to ask me if she could join us to trick or treat, and apparently she wanted my daughter to ask me instead. I laughed at this story and then replied to my daughter, "Why would you think she was my friend? I don't have any children friends." What my daughter said next absolutely chilled me to my bones. According to her, when the girl with the cardboard mask approached them the first time, she wasn't even wearing the mask, so they were able to see her face. As it turns out, she wasn't a girl at all, but actually an older woman around my age with wrinkles on her face. What's even more disturbing is that the old woman had started to steal treats from my daughter's bag apparently when I wasn't looking, and this is why they asked me to go home. This strange old woman was creeping them out and they just wanted to get away from her. I brought my kids home and I told my wife what happened. We made absolutely sure to check through all their candy, but we never found anything suspicious or off. We didn't call the police or anything since, nothing really happened. But looking back on it, I really kind of regret that decision now. What the heck was that old woman doing? And who the hell was that man that was following us around? I don't think I'll ever know. I find it really sick that there's people out there on Halloween hiding behind masks pretending to be children. It's just sick. This happened almost a decade ago when I was 13 years old. I remember my friend and I were really excited about our first time trick-or-treating without our parents. We lived in a small town where nothing ever really happened, and we thought it would be the same that night. It started like any other Halloween night. We collected candy, ran into many of our classmates, and had a lot of fun. At about 8 p.m., we realized we had to head home, but on the way back, we dropped by our teacher's house. She wasn't home, and the street didn't really have many street lights. To add to this, most of the houses had their lights turned off, as well as their Halloween decorations being taken down. My friend and I were slightly spooked and really disappointed by the lack of candy. We wanted to get out of that street as soon as possible. That's when a man then emerged from under one of the streetlights. It was a police officer. Neither one of us seemed to have noticed him before this, possibly due to the darkness. He really startled us, but he seemed really friendly. The cop introduced himself and then pointed to an inconspicuous bungalow. He said an older man living in this house was apparently inviting trick-or-treaters inside. Someone called the police, but when he arrived, no one was answering the door. He then kept telling us that his police car and partner were just around the block. We started to look around, but we couldn't see them. I was a pretty paranoid kid. Growing up, my mom always really loved watching crime shows, and she would always tell me these little tidbits of lessons. Well, one of these happened to be a story about fake cops. Although I don't really remember the details, I remembered that people can pretend to be police officers in order to gain trust. Throughout this whole exchange, I was terrified. His lack of badge, police car, and partner just didn't feel right to me. I was also really conflicted because he was smiling, and he seemed like he just really wanted to help us. That is, until we then heard his really strange request. He said he needed to speak to this potential predator and he needed our help. Since we were young girls, the man would answer if we knocked. The officer claimed that he would hide behind the bushes next to the front door. He would wait for him to invite us in, jump out, and then catch him red-handed. Right at that moment, I knew that my friend felt the same way that I did. Now, we both fell silent, but one of us managed to ask if we could talk it out. The cop said yes, but told us we had a limited time. The street was silent and he could hear everything. I remember the feeling of wanting to say something, but fearing he would hear us and then escalate the situation. We kinda just stared at each other for what felt like forever. The cop was getting increasingly impatient, and he told us we had to decide quickly. Around that moment, a family came down the street and noticed the officer. They were coming over to see what was happening. That's when the cop said that he'd be right back and to not go anywhere. My friend and I then scrambled to collect our thoughts and we decided to run away. We sprinted out of the street and we didn't look back. On our way back home, we had discussed theories that ranged from him being a fake cop, him playing a prank on us, or maybe him being a real cop, but we misunderstood the situation. When we told our parents, we downplayed it a lot and doubted our experience. In the end, we didn't call the police, but our dads drove to the house as well as the area around the house. No cop cars or police officers were in sight. Over the years, I can definitely say I regret not calling the police. I mean, at the time, my friend and I were just convinced that we both misunderstood what happened. We even told our class the next day, and most, including our teacher, thought it wasn't alarming. Looking back, I find it extremely strange that a police officer would put two children in such a potentially dangerous situation. I really wonder what his motives were, but unfortunately, it'll remain unsolved. I guess that's just how it is.
For a little background information on myself, I work for one of the largest haunted houses in the United States. My family has owned and operated this location for more than 30 years. I'm not going to say exactly where it is, but I will say that most people probably know it. The event I'm about to tell you happened around 2005. For more obvious reasons, October is one of our most busiest months. We often hire people that have worked for the haunted house before. And when we were short-staffed, we will ask the coworkers to see if they have anybody they know that would be interested in working for the season. So this particular Halloween event we had going on, we were desperate for staff, as the town was having a large event, and it brought a crazy amount of traffic through our location, more than usual. Now, back in these days, we didn't really have Craigslist or Indeed to hire people. It was more word of mouth, or we could put an ad out on the newspaper. So with that being said, one day we have a man who was in his early 20s. His name is Joseph, and he appeared to be a drifter. Now, some of you that don't know what a drifter is, it's more or less just someone that's homeless, that likes to travel a lot. Now, this wasn't too uncommon in our town. It was kind of a hot spot for this kind of activity. I gave Joseph a pretty formal interview. I knew that he wouldn't have any documentation, and offered to pay him under the table. Joseph had experience working with special effects and makeup. At least he said he did. So I didn't really question it. I told him what time to start, and I paid him a little bit up front, because he seemed to be a little bit down, and it seemed like the right thing to do. Joseph was going to start Halloween Day, and would be doing the makeup on all the staff. Everybody seemed to be having a good time. Families were coming in, tickets were being sold. In about an hour into the event, I had a couple of regular employees come to me saying that they smelled something that resembled blood, or like that of hard copper smell. If you've ever worked for a butcher or by a slaughter plant, you'll know what I'm talking about. I hadn't really thought about it at this point, but as soon as they mentioned to me, I also smelt it. It was very odory and strong, and as I passed by my employees, it became stronger. I noticed that my employees were covered in fake blood, but as I looked at it, the way it dried on their skin looked all too real. I asked them where they got this fake blood from, and almost simultaneously they said Joseph. Now keep in mind, I'm trying to run this event, and we have close to 40 employees there, as well as close to 100 people walking around. But finally I come up to Joseph and I could see his hands covered in the same substance. As I approach him, the smell hits me like a brick wall. Now at this point, I know for a fact that it's actually real blood. I asked Joseph what the hell he thought he was doing, and within seconds the man lost his shit. I mean, he absolutely screamed and yelled like somebody was stabbing him. Up until the point he seemed so calm. Already eyes were starting to look at us from around, and I was trying to calm down the situation to not start a panic. I told Joseph we could talk about the situation in my office. What he did next was something straight out of a horror movie. Joseph goes on to pick up the bucket that he was using, runs right past me and to the others into a large crowd of people, and tosses the bucket all over them. I just stood there with my jaw wide open, not really sure what to say or do. As I was trying to piece together everything that was happening, Joseph got away. I couldn't find him anywhere, all the while trying to comfort everyone, telling them all that it was just a joke. And another employee had called the police by this point. They arrived within a couple of minutes, and I had a lot of questions to answer, but no answers to give. The guy didn't give me any idea, so I couldn't tell him exactly what his real name was. All I knew was that it was Joseph. The only thing I could tell them was a brief description of him. He was tall, lanky. His skin seemed sun-dried and damaged despite his age. He had long black hair and, surprisingly enough, a perfect smile. They never did find out who it was or what his intentions were, nor did we ever find out where the blood came from. And I think it's the scariest part of the whole situation.
This happened back in 2015. Let's get the obligatory backstory out of the way. I'm the eldest of 3 brothers. At the time, my brother Eli was 7 and Danny was 12, and I had just turned 17 a week prior. My parents have always been a couple of party animals. Whenever the holidays would come around, they would always go out and have a few drinks with friends, leaving us home with a babysitter until I was about 14. Then it became my responsibility to watch after my younger brothers. There was this girl who was my age named Shelly who lived across the street from us. She had a brother named Charlie who was the same age as Eli, and they were very good friends. I used to have a crush on Shelly, but I never said anything to her because of the usual teenage awkwardness that we all go through. By the time I grew out of that stage, Shelly had already been through a few boyfriends. Now, I don't mean to sound mean or anything, but Shelly had horrible taste in men. She would always go for these wannabe gangster types. The type of loser who you'd see arguing with the desk clerk at the DMV. It was like these dipshits came off an assembly line or something. I swear she'd drop one loser only to get with another guy who was exactly like the one she just dumped. Anyways, by the time I turned 17, I had gone through a pretty drastic physical transformation. I was much taller and stronger than most kids my age. My father is a very big man, 6'4", 240 pounds, and it seemed that I was shaping up to become just like him. When I started becoming bigger, Shelly started coming around more and more, flirting with me and whatnot. I was always nice to her for the most part, but I honestly had no interest in being in a relationship with her at that point. I mean, after seeing the kind of trouble she brought around. She was one of those girls who thought bragging about how she hung out with gang members and smoked weed was just so fucking cool. I found it to be repulsive and annoying. So the day before Halloween, I was working on fixing my dad's lawnmower. It had been giving us some trouble lately, and I was checking out the motor to see what the issue was. I was working in the garage and had the garage door open. It was simply just way too hot to be inside the garage with the door closed. I can't remember the exact reason, but I was in a bad mood that day. So when I looked over my shoulder to see Shelly standing there in a really skimpy outfit, I just instantly became aggravated.
"Hey, Mike,"
she had said in an irritating, seductive voice. I let out a groan under my breath before I responded. "What's up, Shelly? Can I help you with something?"
"Oh, I was just wondering if you wanted to go somewhere and have a little fun."
No thanks. I think I'm good."
"Stop playing. I've seen the way you look at me."
"I don't know what you're talking about. Now, if you don't mind, I'm busy." At this point, I was beginning to lose my patience.
"Don't be that way. You know you want this."
"The only thing I want is for you to get the hell out of my garage. Isn't there some other dickhead you can bother?" I couldn't believe I said those words as they left my mouth. I'm usually much nicer to her, but this was the first time she had ever come on to me. I knew it was going to happen sooner or later, but I didn't really plan on being so aggressive when I turned her down.
"Are you fucking kidding me? You're turning me down?"
Yeah. Can you please leave now?"
"You idiot. You're gonna regret this."
I just shook my head as I watched her stomp off. I didn't take her threat seriously. I just chalked it up to her not being able to handle rejection well, and then went about my day. The next night was, of course, Halloween. My parents were invited to an adults-only party. They told me that I was to take my brothers trick-or-treating and to not wait up for them, as they wouldn't be back until the next day. So I did what I was told, and I watched over Danny and Eli as they walked from house to house collecting candy. After about an hour, we saw a little boy in a ninja costume standing in the street. The boy was crying his eyes out and asking where his sister was. To my shock, the boy was Charlie, Shelly's younger brother. I asked him what happened. Charlie said that he was trick-or-treating with his sister, and that when he got back from getting candy from the house across the street, which had a really long driveway, his sister was nowhere in sight. I was pretty much instantly worried. I thought something might have happened to her, so I immediately called Charlie's mother, Shauna. Shauna was enraged upon hearing that Charlie was all by himself. She went on to say that her and Shelly got into this huge fight earlier that day because Shelly wanted to spend the evening with another boyfriend instead of taking her brother trick-or-treating. She suspected that Shelly ditched her brother, then ran off with her boyfriend. I didn't want to get involved with this family drama, but I offered to watch after Charlie and take him trick-or-treating with my brothers around the neighborhood. Charlie and Eli were buddies after all. Shauna thanked me, and she said that she would deal with Shelly as soon as she found out where she was. I thought it was pretty shitty for Shelly to ditch her brother and run off with some guy, but it wasn't my problem. I was just going to make sure that Charlie had a good time and then got back home safely. However, I was not prepared for what happened later that night. The rest of that evening was pretty uneventful. Being around Danny and Eli seemed to really cheer up Charlie. Charlie was a good kid. I'm glad I was able to save his Halloween experience and distance him from the chaos that was undoubtedly waiting for him back home, at least for a time. I would say around 9 o'clock was when we dropped Charlie back off at his house. Shauna answered the door and thanked me for looking after him. I could tell she was very upset about the situation. Me and my brothers came back home, and after watching a horror movie and going through the candy, I then made them wash up and get ready for bed. After the boys fell asleep, I settled down in my room and began going through my phone. Just as I was starting to nod off, I was then startled by a really loud smack at my bedroom window. I could hear a muffled voice coming from the other side. I couldn't make out what was being said, but I clearly heard a male voice saying the word motherfucker multiple times. Don't ask me how, but I just somehow knew what was going on. Now, you may be thinking that someone may have been trying to break in, or maybe some psychopath was lurking around the backyard with a knife, but I promise you what was actually going on is much dumber than you could possibly imagine. I recognized the voice that was outside my bedroom window. It belonged to a guy named Derek. He was a scrawny jackass who used to go to my school, but he was expelled for dealing drugs in the bathroom. A real winner. He, of course, had an on and off relationship with Shelly. As I said, I knew why he was outside my house knocking on my window. I believe that Shelly had reached out to him after I turned her down and concocted some bullshit story about me being rude to her or something, and this dork had the audacity to come and provoke me at my home. I have a zero tolerance policy for anyone who comes to my home looking for trouble. I calmly got up and walked to my back porch and saw Derek looking right into my bedroom window, which was next to the porch. Shelly was standing behind him with her arms crossed. I opened the door and stepped out into the back porch. As soon as I did, I was assaulted by a freight train of insults from the two delinquents. Derek had a pocket knife in his hand and was walking up the porch steps towards me. As soon as I saw the knife, I immediately sprung into action. I rushed right for him and shoved him backwards off the steps. He then hit the ground hard. Before he even had a chance to get up, I was towering over him and hitting him in the face with a closed fist. After about the second or third blow, I could see that he was out cold. Blood was gushing from his nose and mouth, and he was twitching really badly. I knew if I continued pounding on him, he'd be drinking through a straw for the rest of his life, and I really didn't want that on my conscience. I got off of Derek and looked over to Shelly, who was standing there with a look of absolute shock all over her face. I was so disgusted with her, and I gave her some parting words. "Did you seriously ditch your brother tonight so you could get with this idiot and come after me? That's really fucking sad, Shelly. You're so pathetic. Get the hell off my property. I'm calling the police." It wasn't until I turned around and started walking back up the porch steps that Shelly started shouting at me.
You son of a bitch! I know gang members. They're gonna come back here and kick your ass!
I shit you not, when I turned back around, there were two police officers that appeared behind Shelly with their guns drawn. Shelly was still shouting at me, completely unaware that the cops were literally right behind her. All I could do was smile and fold my arms and watch as Shelly's face turn completely pale when one of the officers then told her, "Shut up and put your hands in the air." After everything was said and done, Derek was taken to the hospital with a concussion, a broken nose, and several missing teeth. He would face trespassing charges as soon as he recovered. Shelly was kicked out of her house for the stunt she pulled that night, and I haven't seen her since. I do sincerely hope that she learned a lesson that night and that she's turned her life around for the better. There's a couple of more things I'd like to say before this story ends. The first is that if you have younger brothers or sisters, you should make sure they enjoy their Halloween, even if that means you have to cancel your own plans. Halloween is a very special night for children, and there's only a handful of years they have to really enjoy it. The second is that if you show up at someone's house with a knife threatening them, you better have a good dental insurance plan. I'm a 31-year-old female, and I live in Canada. Since it's close to Halloween, what better time to share a really scary experience that happened to me than when I was 18 and around there. I absolutely love October, Halloween, and horror. I live near a large popular park with a zoo, and they host events sometimes during the spooky season. At the time, they were having a Halloween event with food, candy, activities, as well as scares. The theme of this night was Sleepy Hollow. I, of course, was so stoked. I love Sleepy Hollow. I ended up going with my mom, brother, aunt, and cousin. It was cold that night and held the unsettling yet magical atmosphere October has. We had to wait outside in a line for a long-ass time, but finally made it inside the gates. We went to different booths and attractions. Time was passing fairly quickly, but everything was super cool and going well. There was one more thing that I wanted to see before we left. No one else wanted to go through this course with me that was Sleepy Hollow based, so I just decided to go alone. This park is built into a really wooded area, and they had hired people who dressed in costumes. There was a long, creepy trail that you had to go down to get through the course. I had a pit in my stomach and I thought that maybe I shouldn't go, but some of the actors then snapped at me. "Hey, are you going or what? Hurry up, make up your mind. It's not that scary. Are you scared?" So right at the last minute I thought, what the hell, why not? So I entered and there was no going back. I slowly made my way down the path, which had thick fog and some dim Halloween colored lights along the way, so I could see where I was going for the most part. I turned around and I saw my family walk away in the distance. Oh, just great, I thought. They told me that they were going to go on the other side of the trail so that when I was done they'd be there waiting for me, but I had saw them going in a different direction. I turned back around and most of the actors were now behaving how they usually do at attractions. Get in your face, pull on your sleeve, say creepy or dumb crap to you, the usual. As I made my way down the trail, it started getting darker and there was less lighting but the same amount of fog. There was also less actors the further I got. I ran into Jason, who had grabbed onto my sleeve and then followed me a few steps, then moved to someone else. I told him, "Dude, cool costume," and then kept going. Who doesn't love Jason? He's definitely one of my favorite horror movie characters. There was also a few actors dressed as a clown, witch, and a vampire, and they had circled me around laughing like morons and kept trying to get in my way. Pretty much just prancing in a circle, but then they moved on to other people. Now, here's the thing about me. I really love horror things and dressing up, and I understand that these actors' jobs are to scare people. However, I don't like being pushed, grabbed, or to have people in my face when people act over the top. It's just really not cool to me and they need to know where to draw the line. This is the very reason why I don't go to events like this anymore. So after I made it past the group of really annoying prancers, I then picked up my pace. It was getting really colder out and darker. I started to have a feeling like something bad was going to happen. Then I thought to myself, this trail is supposed to be Sleepy Hollow themed. Well, where the hell is Sleepy Hollow then? A few moments after I thought this, I then heard rustling in the trees. Cue cliche. I then moved back and I was getting ready to run. Who knows? Maybe there was a serial killer hiding in the forest. A few people did get stabbed there before. All of a sudden, a guy dressed up as the Headless Horseman then popped out of the trees with a real black horse. It was amazing, but it really startled the crap out of me. He said a few lines from the movie, then trotted away down the path behind me. I heard some people's screams and laughs echo in the distance. At least I knew that I wasn't completely abandoned on the trail. I proceeded forward but felt really creeped out, like someone was watching me or something. I started walking faster, arms tucked close to my body, shivering from the cold, and my only focus right now was to get the hell out of here. All of a sudden, there were some actors randomly positioned trying to act scary or high. Not really sure which one. Then there was a really tall guy dressed up as Freddy Krueger. He was standing right in the middle of the trail, staring right at me. I got a really eerie vibe from him, and I was ready to throw a punch if he was going to do something to me. I made it past the other actors who were annoying me, and I made it to Freddy. Awesome, just my luck. He walked right in front of me. At this point, I really wasn't in the mood anymore for loud mouths to be cackling in my ear, grabbing my clothes, or screaming like lunatics. I just really wanted to find my family now and go home. Now, I'm fairly tall for a girl, and I'm not the kind who gets scared easily. This guy stood at least 6'2" or 6'3", and he wasn't a stick. I then laughed and said, "Okay dude, I'm triggered. Cool costume, classic movie. Now let me get past you." I go to the left, and he quickly steps in front of me. I go to the right, and he moves in front of me. I try going far left, and then he blocks me yet again. I don't mess around, and I really have a temper, so I get really pissed off, then say, "Dude, what the hell is your problem? Some people like you take this crap too far. Now leave me alone and knock it off." I go to walk, and he then pushes right into me, and he won't let me go past him. I snap at him again. "Dude, back the hell off. There's gonna be a problem if you don't screw off. You hear me?" He then just stands there staring at me. I can hear his heavy breathing. Then a bunch of people come down the path, and luckily I'm able to blend in with the crowd and go past him. I then turn around and I see him trying to look for me. He really wasn't focused on anyone else but me. I start jogging trying to get out, and I hear heavy footsteps right behind me. Guess who it is? He then grabs my arm. I pull away from him, and then he tries grabbing me by the waist, but I manage to run past him. Then he catches up to me, actually grabbing my arm yet again, but more forcefully, and pulling me towards him. I tell him to let go of my freaking arm or he's going to be sorry. He grips it even tighter now, and then he says in a creepy tone,
"Don't you get it? You're mine."
Then goes to grab my other arm and tries dragging me. So I knee him, then shove him really hard, and he lets go of me. He tries walking closer to me, and I yell, "If you freaking touch me again or stalk me anymore, I'm gonna call the cops and knock you out. Back off." He kinda just stands there, slightly turning his head to the side, and then starts walking slowly towards me. I raise my fist and channel as much anger and hate that I can, and I tell him again to let it go. He then stops walking and stands there. I turn around and run as fast as I can, checking ever so often, making sure that freak is where I left him. I finally make it to the end, and then one of the actors yells, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, slow down. We don't want someone getting hurt because you're running like that." I've had enough, and I tell him to shut the hell up. I then tell him about the guy on the trail and that he needs to be dealt with accordingly. The guy kind of looks at me funny and just says, "Wait, a guy dressed like Freddy Krueger? I don't think we have an actor dressed like that." "Are you sure?" I said. "How can you not know for sure if you do or not?" He says that it's weird, but he'll have to check with the rest of his staff and he'll be back. Afterwards, my family finally shows up, and I then fill them in on what happened. We decided to leave, but the guy said that he would definitely tell security as well as his staff. I really doubt he did though. Right as we're leaving, I decide to turn around one last time to see if Freddy caught up to me and that maybe he's watching me. And I'm not even kidding. He's out in the crowd, away from the attraction, just standing there, making the cutting motion on his neck. I then yell to my family, "Look, he's right there." And then he quickly turns away and runs back into the trail into the dark. My mom then said, "Let's just forget this and go home." But I replied back with, "Shouldn't we go get that staff member again or something?" She says no, and we go home. I guess I'll never know for sure whether or not this guy was actually a hired actor and took things too far, or if he wasn't hired at all and I was really lucky to get away that night. But I know one thing's for certain. I don't go to haunted attractions or events like this anymore. Thank God for my no bullshit personality. Otherwise, who really knows what would have happened? There's been real stories where an actual killer got hired at an event and had a heyday. Sometimes you really never know who you encounter. Happy Halloween, everyone. I hope it's a good one.